Alright, just started working on this thing. It was stored out in our shed for probably the best part of 15 years out in the cold weather and in bad condition and everything. The brass base that was on this had completely disintegrated, had cracked up. Mice rather had gotten on it, peed all over the base, and the brass base disintegrated. I peeled it off, and it's got an interesting marbled finish. It's Bakelite, but it actually looks pretty decent. So that wasn't a total loss there. The torsion spring had broken. I reattached it, but as you can see by the way that it's well above the cup, that there's probably a good quarter of an inch at least of the torsion spring that's missing. So I'm sure I'm gonna have to pick another one of those up. The escapement wasn't working quite the way that it was supposed to, so I had to get it back into time again. So I think that's probably because the screw was shortened up. So I loosened this up a little bit and turned it over just a hair that way, because that was the opposite of the way that it was hanging, and now it seems to be doing okay. Let's watch it go through a cycle, shall we? There we go, all the way over and back. And what it was doing is it was primarily hanging out over this way, which wasn't working out too well. This has a date stamp on the back of it of 12/52. I thought it was a 7 before, but it's not. I've also got to adjust the spring here that holds the clock winder, because the clock winder spring isn't actually touching the little pallet which holds that from unwinding itself. So I'll have to work on that too. The torsion tube, there's like a lower section of the tube which is supposed to be on here, and that keeps the torsion wire from bouncing around during transit. I had to take that off. That's actually right over here. And the reason being is I couldn't get this thing on there and still have it rotate, because there's not enough of a gap in between there. You can see how small that torsion spring is. So what ended up happening is I put the torsion spring back onto the block, but I couldn't get it low enough so that I could put that safety guard back on there. So we're keeping the safety guard, but not there. Everything seems to be working fairly well, other than the fact that this is up way higher than it's supposed to be. All the mechanisms appear to be moving as well as they're supposed to be going. It's running a little bit fast, but I think a lot of that was to do with the fact that instead of the quarter turn that I was supposed to wind that up to, I went like a turn and a half almost. So it's taken a while for it to stabilize down to this speed. It was moving pretty quick. I'm lucky I didn't snap off the torsion spring actually, but I wanted to get everything going, and it was having a hard time going, because even though this thing was covered in a glass cover, I'll show you the glass cover. That is the cover for it right there. That was completely covered in dust. You couldn't even see the clock anymore. And I think this clock has just been it needed a rough jump start. It should actually be sent out and cleaned and taken care of by a professional, but that would cost about $300 to $400 to get it timed up, and for a clock that's probably worth maybe $150. I'm not hardly sure that's going to be worth the effort. But it's just a really cool thing. It's called a 400-day clock because when you wind this little bugger, you shouldn't have to mess with it again for 400 days. So they say it's good because people can wind the clock up during their anniversaries. Interesting thing I found here was that this clock is only supposed to be wound like 4 times. So, and not 4 times in his lifetime, I'm talking about 4 revolutions of the key on this winding piece, because I was just going to wind it until it stopped, which is of course okay too, because they do say that you can wind these things up, and then once you feel the tension, then you just stop winding it. But it's only like 4 times. It's not 12 or anything like that. And you would think that it would have to be wound a whole lot more than that, considering how long it runs, or how long it runs in theory anyways. I haven't seen it actually go that far. But the fact that it works at all is pretty amazing. And I think if it does maintain its function, I am going to probably pop for a new tension spring. I may end up sending that out because you can I had to take the tension spring out of the barrel and remove it all to attach that piece. I'm glad my wife kept that little block. This little block thing, which you can see is kind of like, it's on a little slide-on piece. That was inside of the clock body because it hadn't run for years before she got it. And luckily that block was there and I was able to reattach it to what's left of that tension spring in there. But it would be nice to get a full-length tension spring so it's operating closer to the cup where it's supposed to be, and you know, at least get it back to a little closer to operating order. But I just thought that was really cool. Thought I'd share that with the people of YouTube. So it's a 1952 400-day Schatz clock.